In the second part of Carl McIntosh's Loose End story, we talk about the music, the treachery, how the band eventually dissolved, leaving Carl with the name and what he's doing with Loose Ends today.
You'd be walking down the street and be like, oh my God, give me a pen, give me a pen. And we were like, because we're not used to that. We're struggling. The record would come on the radio in the mornings, and they make a big thing about this drive time thing in the mornings in America when people are going to work. They see that as an audience. People are stuck in their cars or on the train or whatever, or listening on their Walkman, and Loose Ends all morning long. I would have a problem with some of the decisions that Nicky would take later on. Like Steve would put on his credits, he would list every single piano he played. So Steve would say DX7, ARP, Odyssey, Oberheim, Fender Rhodes, and I would just be vocal and bass. When I was showing him the idea, because it's got keyboards on it, he's sort of looking at me like, who do you think you are? He became embarrassed because he bought his house, but he didn't do anything musical. So there was this uneasiness. He would put his hand across the door and say, yeah, what's happening? I'd be like, what's happening, Steve? He'd be like, yeah, nothing. And then we'd have a whole conversation out there. It's a funny sort of doorstep conversation that was going on with someone that you've spent hotel nights with. You know, I've been in hotels with Steve, like countless hotels. And here we are with our houses, and Steve sort of putting his hand across the doorway sort of thing. And I'd be like, oh, okay. I do regret not having Jane and Steve here now. I mean, I'd love for them to be here now. You know, I'd love to put beats underneath Jane's voice, and I'd love for Steve to play keys on what I'm doing. I miss them, you know, I really do.
So stick with me. If you want to see part one of Carl McIntosh's story, it's online. But let's get to part two, because it's a fascinating tale. And don't forget, please subscribe. It helps me and it allows you to find out when I post something new on the channel. Here is Carl McIntosh from Loose Ends.
He knew he was ahead of his time. I still think he is. I don't think you can lose that. But he says he's in real estate now. And I hate when musicians do that. But a few people have done that, and he's quite successful. I think he's one of those guys. Anything he does, he's going to be successful. But he did take those songs and polish them up. I mean, really spit and polished. On the Dial 999 song, he started coming up with ideas like when you're listening to an airline cockpit and you hear things coming through like 49 degrees, something centigrade, 29 Fahrenheit, it's stuff like that. And he would say that in the song. So there's, in the remix of Dial 999, we had to go back to England, but we were there when he started it. And he went in the studio on the mic and he started saying 49 degrees, this is it, and saying stuff. I was like, what is that? But then when he had a great engineer as well, and when I heard it back, he had actually made the intro of that song so big. And then he was messing around with the telephone in the studio, putting money into the box, trying to get the woman to say 999, but she would say 911. I think it's 911 they got over there. So he was trying to, they were fiddling around with, there was no sampling in them days. So they were fiddling around with the AMS. AMS is a little old school reverb box that could trap little bits of sound. And so we used it for the beginning of Hangin on a String, I think. All them little bits there, that is the AMS. It's not the beginning, it's somewhere in the song. But he liked that. So I think he trapped one of the nines that the operator gave him. And then they flew that they recorded it on tape and edited it so it was saying 999 is not in service. But I mean, this guy's head was where was he getting these ideas from? It was a genius. It really was. Absolute genius.
I mean, what's amazing about that is that it sounds like, okay, he brought out your potential, and also it's like he gave you a sort of better, cleaner guide to where you could go. So in a sense, he opened up a way for you. But I've read that you've said that there was treachery in loose ends. And I just wonder, because that you're definitely a perfectionist, and you definitely you were open to ideas, the way you talk about it. You're definitely open to ideas, but you're definitely a perfectionist. You want the best you can get for the track. And that isn't about ego, but it can be misinterpreted. So I just wondered whether your sort of perfectionism and your power within the band as it was growing was misinterpreted.
I think it was. I think you sound like you've done a little bit of homework on some of these subjects, because that is very on point, the way you frame that question. And some of the I would have a problem with some of the decisions that Nicky would take later on. What happened was, we were using a studio which was an analog studio, and I loved that studio. And after we gained success, the studio got bigger. It was a different studio, a much bigger studio in Philadelphia. I think we started off at Alpha, and the Harrison desk, beautiful 1975 desk. And then after Hangin on the String success, we went to Sigma. Sigma Sound is where OJs and all the big guys perform, all the huge stars. But they had this studio which was state of the art. It was digital. And the digital studio, they thought it was great. And Nicky was going along with it. He was like, yeah, this is great. The room, you could put 10 cars in it. It was it was massive. I didn't like it because I didn't understand digital. Digital sound, to me, excuse me, digital in the 80s was a mess. To me, when they first started playing around with CDs and stuff, it just sounded very glassy, very metallic-y, very hard, and it didn't suit the warm cloak that we used to be able to give our records, like on the first record. And I think maybe even the second record was recorded at Alpha. And in fact, it was, because it had Hanging on a String on it. But then I think by the third album, I think it was Savora, we was in this very posh studio, and I'd come up with songs, and I was now becoming a little bit more of a front man, because I was singing. I was made to sing. And the singing came about through Jane not having any ideas for a second verse, really. I mean, as we developed as a band, we gave Jane the idea to write the verses for. She'd write a verse and it'd be great. And then she'd be like, oh, I don't know what to hear for the second verse. And eventually she'd tap me on the shoulder. She'd be like, have you got any ideas for the second verse? So, okay. So then I would sing something, and then she'd go, that's it. Like, what do you mean that's it? You record me and then learn it. No, you're gonna sing it. So then I was becoming more of a singer now. And so I felt much more comfortable sort of talking to Nicky about things I didn't think were working. And so this digital thing, it was, becoming an issue with me. I didn't like it. And Nicky started, he would say things like, I think you should worry more about your bass playing. You know, he was like, you should worry more about playing your bass playing. Let me worry about the production. So we had those little moments, you know, where Nicky was like, you know, he could be a little bit of a bitch if he wanted to. He'd give you a little slap as well, you know. So you know, it was those little things were going on. And I wouldn't say I fell out with him, but I think out of the three of us, I was the one that would go to the mastering cut, because I've seen where you've got everything in place, the record is good, everything's nice. There's only one more hurdle, and that's the mastering session. And sometimes they would do it without us there and send it to me they would send it to me, right? Well, why are you sending it to me? They're like, yeah, no, send it to Carl, let him hear it. If he agrees it, then we can sign off on it. I'd put the record on, acetate, and it sounded terrible. I was like, no, how did they do that? So then I would say, no, don't like it. So then they'd book me in with the engineers to do the mastering cuts. And so this is now becoming a bit of a problem for Steve, because Steve was very much a 9-to-5 guy. You know, he'd get up in the morning, go studio, come home, be with his missus, you know, do his family thing. Whereas I was a guy that after studio, I'd be writing another song. You know, I'll be up for another session, right? So, and I think it was bothering him a little bit. You know, he's sort of starting to look over his shoulder a little bit, like this guy, he's really busy, you know, and he's doing a lot on these records. So little things started to open up. Like Steve would put on his credits, he would list every single piano he played. So Steve would say DX7, Up, Odyssey, Oberheim, Fender Rhodes, and I would just be vocal and bass, vocal, bass, guitar. And then as time went on, it was vocal, bass, guitar, drum programming, you know, stuff like, and then I started to program. So I started to, you know, get into drum programming and programming keyboards as well, which Steve was not happy. I think that was probably not a good thing for me to get into, but it was the technology taking me there. I bought something like a sequencer, and the sequencer gave me the opportunity to add keyboards, and adding the keyboards meant that I could show more of the idea to him. But when I was showing him the idea, because it's got keyboards on it, he's sort of looking at me like, who do you think you are? You've got keyboards on that. But I mean, he would do it to me many times, because when we did Hanging on a String, I got to the studio with my bass, and I sat down there like, oh, let me hear it. Already had bass on it. They put Moog bass, and they did the drum pattern when I wasn't there. So, you know, I basically got there. I heard they did the pattern was literally so similar to the SOS bands thing, and they knew I wouldn't be down with that. So they kind of did it before I got there. And I remember sitting in the studio, Hanging on a String session. I was seething. I didn't know where this energy, what could I do with this energy? I couldn't sit there. I was so embarrassed because I come from London to play bass on my songs, and so it's already done. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh, what do I do with this energy? So what I did, I asked them if they could set up a guitar amp for me, and you know, if I could play some guitar ideas in the corner. So as they were playing the track, I mean, I'm playing the guitar bits. None of the guitar that you hear on Hanging on a String was on the demo. That was all done in that moment where I was so angry, and I was playing in the corner, and Nicky would just look over and go, put that on the tape, right? And then so they'd run the tape again, and then I'd put what I played on the tape, and then I had another idea, and he'd look over and say, put that on it, put that on the tape. There's about 10 ideas going down. All my seagulls and gunshots and chicken grease. These are guitar, funk guitar terms. And you know, he'd add them to the song. And this is how the song became a guitarist record, really, because it wasn't really before. It was more keyboards and it was much more of a keyboard thing. But now it was guitars, and you know, Nicky he chose the right parts, because they, to this day, they still sound good.
I mean, the thing about Hanging on a String, and I know we're at the second album and we're sort of going backwards and forwards here, but Hanging on a String, it was the record that propelled you into the stratosphere, more so in America than Britain. Why do you think that? And I've looked at comments, you know, while doing the research for this. I was looking at comments on videos on YouTube, mainly from Americans. And it's amazing how you are still so in their hearts and in their minds with your music. So I just wondered, in your perspective, why Britain, I mean, you were successful in Britain, but you weren't as successful in Britain as you were in America, and why you were more successful in America in your terms, why you think that was so.
I have to put it down to airplay. We used to listen, I should say, and read all the music mags, and we could tell who was being played on Radio 1. See, national radio in England was set for pop, and any hint of blackness or soul or jazz would just get that song tossed in the dustbin. They would not play that on Radio 1 at all. And even now, if you listen to Radio 1, when they speak about bands, they're not talking about BT Express or Light the World. They're talking about rock bands, you know, or young up and coming punk bands. And so this is what we were up against. And we used to almost like keep a lookout to see which soul records they did play, if they ever did play it. And to my knowledge, Phil Ferron, maybe yes. Phil Ferron, he got played on Radio 1. He did that type of pop that they felt fitted in with their program. But our slick sort of soul, it was just nowhere on the radio shows that they were playing that you could hear an opening for a Loose Ends record. It was just not in the vein. So we wouldn't get played. And to be honest, when I went to America to promote Hanging on a String, it blew my mind. I'm talking the airport people recognized us. You know, people that was working in car parks, people that were working in the store down the road, you know, they knew who we were. Like, oh my God, you know, it was, you'd be walking down the street and be like, oh my God, give me a pen. And we were like, because we're not used to that. We're struggling. And what happened was, the record would come on the radio in the mornings, and they make a big thing about this drive time thing in the mornings in America when people are going to work. They see that as an audience. People are stuck in their cars or on the train or whatever, or listening on their Walkman, and Loose Ends all morning long, 3 times in the morning, maybe 4 times after that during the day. The song was getting played 10 times a day. So I think that is the difference. Also, the marketing campaign that the Americans were running seemed to have, like in England, Virgin didn't tell us what they were going to do marketing wise. There would be posters. We saw that in Hackney, because I lived in Hackney. There'd be posters in Hackney, maybe some in Tottenham. Areas where there would be black people, there'd be posters. You might even get a new single out now, Loose Ends. You might even get one of those on the Pirates. Oh, the Pirates. That was like a little secret weapon. All right, but it still didn't get us across the line.
Even though that's the case, in Britain, you were part, and the Brit Funk era was part of a massive revolution. And I talked to DC Lee recently, and she said that this era was the first time that Black British people could watch Black British people on stage or listen to Black British people's music and have a reflection of their lives.
Right. Yes, it was. It was amazing because just didn't happen when we needed it to happen. It happened sort of towards the middle part. So first album, no, it was first album, actually. The first album, A Little Spice. I heard that on pirate radio. But pirate radio is not clocking up sales. And it's, when I say sales, it's not clocking up PRS, which is mechanical royalties that musicians receive when their records are played on a royalty. Because it's a pirate radio, you're not going to earn anything from that. So 50 stations are playing loose ends. Everyone loves loose ends, but no money is going towards loose ends. All right, so that was the first thing. The actual main stations were starting to listen to the pirates, right? But it was as if Capital Radio started doing it. Radio London started listening to pirates. But Radio 1, the national, they stayed steadfast. They weren't going to change. So, and I think without Radio 1 in this country, it's very hard to sell millions or thousands of records, because it would be, you put out the record and on the Thursday of that week, you'd be on Top of the Pops, hopefully. Or no, it'd be the next week, you'd be on Top of the Pops. And Top of the Pops will push you up to a level, hopefully in the top 15. And then from there, they would have to play on Radio 1. But what Radio 1 would do is they would play at 2 o'clock in the morning, or they would play it like sort of 5 a.m., when no one was up. So you didn't generate as much sales as you could. Whereas in America, from 9 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, they'd be playing it round the clock. And we got that sort of airplay, that sort of, what do they call it? That coverage from America and not from England. And I think that if we had got it from England, because when England is in love with like the Spice Girls, or if they're in love with it, they will become big. But we just didn't, I don't think we excited people at Radio 1 at all. And they
I do think you fell between eras in a way. Do you know what I mean? I think you just fell in that thing. But I want to get back to I want to get back to the third album, Zagora, because you were talking about in the studio and Nicky Martinelli's sort of more synthesizer, can I call it, vision of the album, and then you come back to Britain, and it's heard by the record company, and they go, well, where's the hit? Don't go away. There's much more coming up. But don't forget, please subscribe. It does help me. It allows you to find out when something new is posted on the channel. Okay, back to Carl McIntosh of Loose Ends. It's heard by the record company, and they go, well, where's the hit?
Yeah. So there was the Zagora album. It's a funny one because the Zagora album was it was done in a funny kind of way. First of all, it was done using two, an Italian and a Jewish programmer, Randy, I think or Rick, and Jim Salomon, the drummer. He's Italian. These are great friends of ours, right? But they are two jokers, right? But when they had a, let me just think now, what was it? Fairlight. They had a Fairlight synthesizer. And it looks like a coffin, like a white coffin with a screen on the end of it. And you had a pen. So you had to do everything on the screen with a pen. And it was like, so you'd say, he would say, Carl, come over. No, mainly Steve. Steve, come and play the bass line for Stay a While, Child. So Steve would get up and go, boom, 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 whatever. And then he would go, thank you. Now go and sit down. Right? And then he'd click, 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 click. And then you'd hear it go, and he'd have to quantize it. And eventually, maybe an hour later, it would play it perfect.
So you've got the third album, Zagora, and it's much more sort of synthesized based. You come back to Britain and they go, where's the hit?
Up until that time, we would normally just program a drum pattern, and me and Steve would just come up with something to the drum pattern. But in this particular outing, we had programmers that would, what we were going to play, they would put that into the sequencer. And so the drum machine, the bass, the overdubs, any high parts, low parts were all going to be programmed into the song. And as I say, the Fairlight was so, it took so long to do. It was boring. And we ran out of time. We normally record from the end of September to like the beginning of October. So it'll be October and November, 8 weeks, album's finished. Well, we got to the end of October and then we went into November. And then it was like, still, Christmas is coming. And I think everyone, the studio were like, look, are you guys going to be finished before Christmas or what? So we said, we ain't going to be finished before Christmas. So we decided to come home for Christmas. And then once we come home for Christmas, it was good, a little rest from it. We had a whole bunch of songs that we weren't sure how we felt about these songs because it took so long to make it. And it was such a different way of making it as well. This whole sequence of thing, you know, adding bits of the song at a time, which was really strange. Anyway, we get back to London and we used to have this disco promotions. Disco promotions sounds so old, doesn't it? Like a promotions manager, and he used to take us up and down to clubs to promote, you know, our songs and stuff. And while we were back in town, he was like, you know, everyone wants to hear this new album, you know, because we just did Hanging on a String, and you know, we all want to hear it. Have you got any new songs? So we said, yeah, we got some songs. So we put on the album for him. But what had happened just before that story starts, what had happened was after seeing those two programmers, Jim and Rick, because I think it was either Rick or Randy, I can't remember his name, but I decided to buy myself a sequencer, a poor man's Fairlight, I call it. It's it's a drum machine called a Lin 9000. And it's not as big as a Fairlight. It doesn't cost as much as a Fairlight, but it can do sequencing quite quickly. And because they were so slow at what they were doing, and it was such an arduous sort of task, I thought, no, I'm definitely going to get into this sequencing thing, because if that is what Nicky wants us to do, it'd be easier for us to have our own sequencer, put everything in it, and when we just say, look, this is the song. And so I went and bought one. And when I went and bought it, I came up with 3 ideas. One was called Johnny Broadhead, one was Gonna Make You Mine, and the other one was the reggae song that turned out to be Slowed Down, right? So I had them ideas, but I had to be very cautious now about showing Steve ideas because they were a little bit more developed. They're almost like songs. Like Gonna Make You Mine is exactly as you heard it. This is how, because I had a sequencer now, so it sounds like a little band is playing, you know. And I'd be careful about how playing those type of ideas to Steve. So what had happened was we'd come home for Christmas, Virgin had some sort of meeting with us with Erskine Thompson, our disco promotions guy. And he was like, let me hear this album. So we played him the album and it's going through all the songs. And he was like, where's, he pulled over. We was going to some dance in Birmingham and he pulled over and he said, let me just say something here, right? Is this album finished? So I said, well, no, we're gonna go back, we're gonna do some more stuff, you know. And he was like, more songs or more stuff to this? He goes, because this ain't gonna get it. He said, I'll tell you right now, you have a lot on your heads. You've just now put out a song which has kind of left the British public with a bit of egg on their face, because they have not played your record and it's gone to another country and gone #1. So now you've really got to prove to them that it's not a fluke. You can actually do this. So where's the hit record? So it's like, it was a tense moment.
But what a clever guy. I mean, really, like,
yeah.
And it's also brave. I mean, I know he's in the record company and it's his job, but it can't be easy to say to artists, this ain't gonna work.
He was that type of guy. He was very straight, always straight-faced, a bit like my dad, very straight-faced, didn't smile much. And he meant business. You know, when he said stuff, he meant business. And when he said that, I sort of went, I've got a few song ideas that might be able to work. And so I put in a cassette, it was cassettes then. I put in a cassette of Johnny Broadhead. And he was, oh, this is perky. And he liked it. And then Gonna Make You Mine. I actually conned Jane into singing the chorus with me because I had the idea for the chorus, and he liked that. He said, that's more like it. Now we're talking. And I played him the reggae idea, and he just sort of went, oh, that's rubbish. What's all that about? So I was like, okay, well, maybe not that one. But he liked Gonna Make You Mine. He liked Johnny Broadhead. And I think there was another one. The Slow Down idea hadn't come about because it was a reggae song. It was a reggae idea. And he is a reggae fanatic. But he sort of looked at the idea as if to say, please, don't try and do reggae. You know, it was that sort of vibe. You're doing soul, you're doing well, right? Just leave it at that. Yeah, don't come over to our side. And so I was like, okay, well, leave that alone. But he did say that you need to go in the studio and record these songs now. So we went into Red Bus Studios in Edgware Road, and we recorded Johnny Broadhead. We recorded Gonna Make You Mine. And as I said, the other one hadn't been born yet. They hadn't morphed into what it was. And until when I went back to Philadelphia, I played Nick Martinelli, the reggae, the little idea that I had. And he said, you need to go back and do that again with the Roland 808 drum machine and think of Kenny Burke. So that was really how that album, Zagora, sort of went from being a pile of doo-doo to, you know, what it became. Because those songs are Gonna Make Your Mind Slow Down. Because after he told me to go home, sorry, Nick Martinelli, after he told me to go home and record the reggae idea again, when I went home to the apartment, Jane Eugene used to have a little ritual. She used to love watching Come On Down, The Price Is Right, whatever that show is. I think it's called The Price Is Right. The guy would say, come on down. And she loved that show. So she'd go home, she loved eating cornflakes and watching that. Unfortunately, our equipment was in the same room. So I remember I do get like this, even with my own missus sometimes. She's a bit of a TV, she loves watching TV and stuff. And sometimes when I don't have my studio, or if I'm in a hotel or something, and your missus is there or your partner's there and they're trying to do something and you're trying to do, it's like, I do get frustrated sometimes. And I think I got frustrated that day. And I literally dragged all the equipment on the table. It was with the table that it was on. into a little cloakroom that we had, laundry room, and the stuff was plugged in. I was so annoyed. I was getting frustrated. I wanted to get the idea down while it was fresh in my head. I was thinking about what Nikki said, and I just literally dragged everything. And people was like, no, 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 it's still plugged in. So I plugged everything out, went in the actual cloakroom, set up the drum machine. And when the song started to come together with the bass line, boom, 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 I was like, right, I'm at the chorus now. Slow down. And what should I say? I can see your feet. So I was saying all these little, trying to get the lyric. Then Jane started shouting lyrics. I can't take the heat. You know, and like, oh, I'll use that one. And then Steve would be like, is this the part? Is this the part? Say, and then he'd come up with a little part for the breakdown. And it was like, oh, by the end of that night, we was all in that room. We finished the whole song, 2 verses and the chorus. And that was the hit for that album. But when we had actually gone back to London, the album was a mess. We had half a record. In fact, the Virgin, Erskine told us, don't play that to Virgin. He said, if I was you, just come up with excuses. Tell him you ain't got cassette. Tell him this has happened and that's happened and whatever. Don't play that to Virgin. Right? He said, let's go in the studio and record Johnny Broadhead. Let's go and record Gonna Make You Mine. And, you know, we'll go from there. And so Virgin were already happy with the Gonna Make You Mine recording. And they were looking forward to this album. And he was keeping them on ice. So when we went back to America and we came up with Slow Down, then it was like, oh, when we went back to England, Erskine was like, thank God. Oh, you did it. Because, you know, he set us straight. He let us know that that record was not going to be good enough to go out. So it was lovely having those people around us, you know, some no-nonsense people.
I mean, what's fascinating, by 1988, and when you get onto the real Chucky Boo, at this stage, the band had been in existence for, I think, about 7 years, because I think it started in 81.
Right.
It was the 4th album in 4 years that had been released.
Yeah.
And this was a point where you started getting some money,
right?
But it was also the point where the band split in a way. It was the first, you know, obvious split. So what happened? It's a sort of weird combination, because they must have realized, money's coming in, but at the same time, Jane and Steve, what I've sort of heard, is lost a lot of interest.
Yeah, it was. You know what? Looking back on it now, I think the Jane and Steve were tired. I think that they were tired, and I think having money was giving them the opportunity to do other things, and they kind of got caught up in doing other things and being a little bit famous as well, because no one is going to tell you that you don't deserve a holiday, or you don't deserve to be in Paris recording someone, or you don't, you know, these are the things that come with being someone who has acquired a certain amount of success and has a little bit of money now. People like Jane bought a house in Streatham, Steve bought a house in Sydenham, and they had nice cars. Jane bought a BM, Steve bought a Mercedes. And in the end, I was the last person to buy a house. But my house was bought specifically for one reason only, and this was to put a studio in it, right? Because my mother, bless her, she was a clever old girl. She just said, Carl, I think you need to have your own studio, because I used to write at home. And neighbors, I mean, in the end, they all kind of swallowed their words, right? Because they'd be banging on the door, calling the police. And then after a while, they were like, yeah, that's my neighbor, he's on the TV. But but it was a rough time for her. So I think my mother, she encouraged me to buy my own house so that I could have the space to build this room, you know, soundproof it and make sure no one else was disturbed. So when I bought the house, and I soundproofed it and put the studio in there, I went over to Steve's house. He didn't live far from here, because I'm in Forest Hill. He was in Sydenham. He became embarrassed because he bought his house, but he didn't do anything musical. So there was this uneasiness. He would put his hand across the door and say, "Yeah, what's happening?" I'd be like, "What's happening, Steve?" He'd be like, "Yeah, nothing." And then we'd have a whole conversation out there. We're like, "You all right?" I'm like, yeah, I'm all right. Okay, all right then. I'll just maybe catch you up later. It's a funny sort of doorstep conversation that was going on with someone that you've spent hotel nights with. You know, I've been in hotels with Steve, like countless hotels, and here we are with our houses, and Steve sort of putting his hand across the doorway, sort of thing, and I'm like, oh, okay. But he would always tell me that he was actually building a studio. The fact that I did actually go and build a studio, I think might have, because he didn't actually build a studio. So I think he was a bit bothered by that, because he was influencing me after shows. He'd be like, "I'm going to get a studio. I'm going to get some equipment. I'm going to do this. And if you get a house around the corner from me, we can talk together. We can," you know, I'm like, fine. I bought into it. I went and bought a house nowhere near my parents, near to Steve, put the studio in it, only to find out that he didn't, he was just talking. So
well, the weird thing is in this relationship for me is that there are lots of asides. There are lots of like sort of, you're both giving each other sort of messages, but they're a bit secret. You know what I mean? They're behind the words, and there's not that moment of saying, "What the F are you doing?" You know what I mean? There's not that explosion.
No, there was an explosion, and this is the end, because what had happened was when I built my studio, I'd become affluent. You know, I didn't realize it, but I had a nice car. Well, I used to drive a Jeep Wrangler, right? So it was an old CJ7, but they'd done it up, so you could see me coming, right? It was, you know, really big, nice car. And so when Jane and Steve bought their car, I didn't need to buy a nice car, because my thing was being rugged. I like being rough. And, you know, I had the locks, I had the image, I had the rough car, and now I had the house with the studio. And I met this guy called Kenny, said he could write lyrics. I met another guy called Trevor through Kenny, and they were songwriters. And they used to come over to the studio with me, and we used to sit there, you know, smoking weed and whatever, and listening to music. And we had some good times. Then they said that they would be happy to help me to write songs if I wanted to do anything, you know, because at the time there was a bit of a hiatus with Loose Ends. We weren't doing anything for a year, and Jane was in LA, Steve was in Paris, and he was working in production on a artist over there. And I was in my studio, so I was loving it, because equipment and, you know, new stuff, toys, synthesizers and drum machines, and oh, it was a lovely time. It was a great time. So you know, I had my Rhodes, I had my guitar, I had my new keyboards, and I had an engineer, a good engineer. He said, "You should record everything in there." So all right, tell me what I need. And he made the list out. I gave the list to my publisher, and things were turning up like every day, like tape machines. And I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. But I didn't know what to do with all the stuff. My plan was to sit and wait for Steve, you know, get the call from Steve and Jane, time to write again, time to get back on the road. But the call never came. And the two guys that were with me, I would come up with an idea, and they said, "Let us write something to it." So don't know, this is probably more for loose ends. All right then. So then 3 weeks will go past, a month, 2 months. We're like, have you seen Jane and Steve? Well, I spoke to him, yeah, but I don't know. They've not come round yet. And this went on for about, I'd say about 2 months. And then I gave them some stuff. I said, go on, write something to this. And they wrote something. I think the first one was Love Controversy or something. And when I heard what they wrote, I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to navigate this? Because you can't give this to Jane to sing. Someone's already written everything. The music's all done. And it sounds beautiful. What had happened was, it wasn't just them. They had another person. Trevor, he had a lady called Sunai Suleiman. And she was his missus. And she basically had all his children. I think she had about 3 or 4 kids. And while she was at home with the kids, she would be writing lyrics. So when they said they were doing it, it wasn't exactly true, but they were good writers. But she was like, she took it over the top, you know, once, because she could sing, she had a unique sounding voice also. So I listened to the first one, I was like, okay, here's another one. And then here's another one. And I'm waiting on Jane and Steve, and nothing would happen. So eventually we had a meeting at Tony Hall's office, and Jane came and Steve came, and they were all talking about what they were doing. And there was a lot of talk about what they were actually doing now. And there was no talk about what loose ends are going to be doing in the future. And so I actually said, you know, what the hell's going on here? What are you doing? You know, and it was like, what's your problem? And I think Steve said something disrespectful, something under his breath. And I was like, oh, really? I think I got up and locked the door. And everyone was like, uh-oh, what's going on here now? Things you do when you're young, eh?
You didn't play Marvin Gaye and Curtis Mayfield, though, did you?
No. No. Steve was like starting to think like, oh, hang on a minute, this is gonna kick off now. Oh yeah, it is, because I've been waiting now. At this point, I would say nearly all the songs in the Look How Long album was completed. Steve and Jane, they talk on the phone, they come in, but they never get there. I've done about 10 months of me on my own recording, waiting for them. And at this point now, I don't even know what I'm doing, because the songs sound so good, but they're not on it. So I'm thinking, how would you, what would you take the singer's voice off and put Jane on? Jane is not a woman who's going to go and sing someone else's song, right? So that's a no-no. Then Steve, I think there was one song that Steve did actually, the record company told him to get his ass down to the studio, and he did come and he played on Love's Got Me. But, you know, shortly after that, he led me on some weird wild goose chase. I had to drop him home, and then I dropped him home, and then he went inside. When he said, drop me home, something's happened, I just got to pop home for a minute. He went inside, and I think I was sitting outside for about 40 minutes. And in the end, I went, what's going on here? So I went to the door, I looked through the letterbox, and he was inside walking up and down. I was banging the door, he wouldn't open it. I thought, nah, something's not right here. But there was that meeting with Steve and Jane, where I did say, you know, I was really forceful. And, you know, I think I even threw some water at him. But we had this big argument about, what are you doing for loose ends? The real Chucky Boo, in my opinion, was not our best work. And I was very insecure that It was the fourth album as well, and I think we're about to do the last album. You don't want none of those albums to come out rubbish, turn out rubbish. And I thought Chucky Boo slightly under the mark for me. And I was a little bit worried that Virgin were going to drop us. But when they said, no, we want another album, I was like, oh, great. But then Jane now, where was she? Where was Steve? So I was like, oh my God, pulling my hair out.
Don't go away. There's still time to find out what Carl is doing today and his view of Steve and Jane. Now, don't forget, subscribe. That helps me, and it also allows you to find out when I've posted something new on the channel. Let's get back to Carl from Loose Ends.
How did you deal with that legal aspect, though? Because in the end, I presume you have the name, you must do today. You
Right.
are Loose Ends. So,
Yeah.
and I just wondered
Right.
legally, how did that, how did they extract themselves,
Well,
or you get them extracted? I don't know how it worked.
Because I was driving down the road about 2 days later, and I heard Loose Ends have broken up. Right, so that argument was inconclusive. I did insult him a few times. I told him, look, better get your shit together, right? We got work to do, right? And Jane, right? Because Jane was big as a house at the time. I was like, Jane, you need to lose some weight. You need to get back on the why are we here? Why are we doing this? It's the best job in the world. You're on the plane, someone is paying for you to get on a plane and go and make hit records. And what are you doing? I was really livid. So, but I didn't think it wasn't like, oh, I'm not doing this no more. It wasn't nothing like that. But I think I did say that if they didn't, get their stuff together, then it don't make no sense me doing this. Now, don't forget, there was a few, I didn't mention it before, but there were some sessions where I felt like I was there doing production, I was singing, I was, and Steve, it's like he wasn't, it's like he wasn't focused on it. He was distracted, So, and there was also some sessions where I turned up and I'm the only one there. And I think when I did the song, the medley, that was one of those sessions where I was the only person in the studio. And so I just decided, well, let me just do something to fiddle around with. And it ended up being Mr. Bachelor. It ended up being those 3 songs. And I'm actually playing them to them when they turn up at 10 o'clock at night. The studio was booked from 12 in the afternoon and they turn up at 10. And I was livid, but I'm playing it to them and I'm seeing their faces going, oh, this is all right. So at the end of the night, I feel good about, everyone feeling nice about what I've done. But the decay, the rot had started from there. So by the time we got to this little hiatus period now, where they've disappeared for 11 months, I felt bad. I really had a good go at them, and I hoped that my words wouldn't be taken the wrong way, because Jane, she had a way of twisting. She was very clever. Like, she would say things like, "Oh, you think you're loose ends. He thinks he's loose ends." And really, if I tried to give motivation, it would be that little, "Oh, you think you're loose ends" type of thing. Kind of cleverly, what's the word, when deflect. She was really good at deflecting your comments so that it doesn't seem like you're trying to help. It seems like you're trying to be bossy. And she would say things like, "Oh, you're too controlling." Like, how could I be controlling? I'm just one of yous, why'd you say that? Because I used to get into it with her about her weight. Now, Jane created me, right? The locks. She's the one who said, wear this, wear that, do this, do that. You should always never wear more than 3 colors. Never, she was really like, she knew how to make someone look good, act a certain way, even table manners. She created that in me. But when she started to put on a lot of weight now, to the point where people would see Jane in a shop with me and run up to me and ask me for my autograph, and she'd be standing right there, and they wouldn't ask her. So they stopped recognizing her. And it would break my heart when that would happen. So I'd tell her, Jane, you need to get into your health, get into some good food. And she'd just take offense. She would just take offense. She'd be like, how dare you, you know? So, you know, so when we got to that meeting now, it was like everything came out. And so after that, I heard that we had broken up. So someone probably went to the record company and said, no, I'm not taking that from him or whatever. And then when that happened, the record company called us and said they need to speak to us separately. So they called Steve, and I'm not sure what the conversation was. I think he went first. They called Jane. In fact, there was a list of what Virgin would consider a profitable outcome to the Loose Ends breakup. And it went something like this: Jane, or Jane and Steve, or Steve, and then Steve and Carl, right? So then that was interesting, because I've gone in there when it was my turn to speak to Virgin. I've gone into this meeting now, and they're like, come on now, what's happening? What's going on? You know, we've heard big arguments. I said, yeah, we did have an argument. And they said, well, what are you arguing about? I said, well, I've been in the studio for about 11 months trying to record next album, and I haven't seen anyone. So yeah, I did get upset. Next album, you say? I said, yeah. Ah, okay. Well, how far you got with it? I said, well, I haven't got Jane and Steve on it yet. That's the problem. Oh, really? I said, yeah. Well, have you got any tracks from this new album? I said, yeah, I've got some on me now. And I put in Don't Be a Fool. And Don't Be a Fool didn't even have the right beat on it, but just the chorus on its, you know, they could hear the song. And he was like, yeah. And then next one, I think it was Time Is Ticking. And then Symptoms of Love. I think I had those on a cassette. And so anyway, I played those to Mick Clark. And he's going, well, keep me in the loop, yeah? Just keep me informed as to, you know, when they're going to come down and stuff. And he was totally different after he heard the songs. So then he calls me in again next week. And he calls me in and he goes, have you heard from Jane and Steve yet? So Steve, this is the time when Steve came down and he played on Love's Got Me. So I said, yeah, I saw Steve. He said, good. What about Jane? I said, I haven't seen Jane. Oh, we'll get on her. So they've told Jane, get your ass down the studio, because they liking what they're hearing. And so Jane decides to go to America. She's like, no, not doing that. I don't know why. I guess she must have thought that because the songs are already liked by the record company, she must have thought that that was me trying to squeeze her out or something, because she hadn't written those songs. But it was a genuine organic conversation about what songs I was working on. And I just said, yeah, put that in. That's what I'm working on. And they loved it. So Jane, I don't know what happened. Jane didn't turn up. And then about 2 weeks later, I was coming back from the shop, and I saw, as I turned into my driveway, it was like 5 XJSs outside my house. So I'm like, what's going on here? One was in my driveway, all these like really gorgeous Jaguars. And I knock on the door, my mum's there. She's like, Virgin are here. So I'm like, okay.
That's where all your money went.
The XJSs. So I've gone in there, and there's all these execs, and they're like, oh, we want to hear the album. We want to hear what you're working on. So I've played Hold Tight, Don't You Ever Try Change Me, and Time Is Ticking. And they're like, oh, this is Loose Ends. You're Loose Ends, ain't you? I said, whoa, yeah, I'm in the band. He said, nah, you're Loose Ends. And then he said, come to the office next week. I want to talk to you seriously. So I've gone to Mick Clarke's office, and he said, so what's going on with Jane and Steve then? Have they come on the album yet? And in the conversations that I was having with Mick Clarke, I would always tell him that there is a possibility. They haven't come yet, but we're still talking, and you know, I'm cool for them to come down and when they're ready. And he said, Carl, they're not coming. They're not coming, are they? I said, what do you mean? He said, he got up and he closed the door and he said, Carl, you've got to let them go. Then what it was, Steve used to, how can I put this? He used to socialize in places where record company people used to socialize in the West End. So in Carnaby Street, in those pubs in those areas. And I think that they got a kind of, they kind of knew where his head was at, because Steve was starting to talk funny, he was starting to say strange things, and he'd always be talking about the album and it's coming out. And now they know that they've had to literally force him to go to the studio, but they've heard the songs. They know the source of the songs is no longer coming from him. So he's telling them that they're coming from him, and they're sort of going, oh, I don't know. So Steve now, they're telling me that Steve is not likely to be on this record. It's not my decision. I've not said anything. I'm telling them, look, he's cool. He's just not come round yet, you know? And I'm hoping that he does come round, but they've said, nah, let's close the door on that. Let's just finish this record with you. And the people that you're working with, they seem okay. I'd like to meet them. And so there was 2 vocalists. There was Sunai, there's 3 vocalists. There was Sunai, there was Trisha Lewin, and
Linda, wasn't it?
Linda Carrier, yeah. Linda, Lawrence Delabank's sister. So, and Lawrence was on that record as well. He played on Hold Tight. His little style, you know, he played it on Hold Tight. So they was totally in love with, you know, what we were doing. And they said, from this day on, we don't want to talk about James Steve no more. And then the next thing I knew, I was being given a new contract, and they said they were going to release the record, which they did do, and it just had my face on it. And, you know, I kind of regret it now, because, you know, I think that Jane, I don't want to make a record that other people might be offended by, you know. I want to make records that people think, wow, yeah, that's the group I love. But it kind of got murky, you know, because people are now saying, well, where's the other 2? And, you know, it's just, I hate all of that stuff. But that is exactly how it happened. And after the album came out, I became more familiar with production, and I started to produce and remix and do all kinds of wonderful things which I didn't realize were open to me before. But now I was like the man for about 2 or 3 years. I was like the guy, you know. So it was nice, but as I say, I do regret not having Jane and Steve here now. I mean, I'd love for them to be here now. You know, I'd love to put beats underneath Jane's voice, and I'd love for Steve to play keys on what I'm doing. I miss them, you know, I really do.
But in a way, it must have been a sense of freedom for you, because not related to the people, because they got their own freedom in a way, because it must have been at a point where they must have felt relieved that it was over in some way as well. And for you as well.
Yeah, it was nice, but it was nicer when they were there, you know. But now it was kind of the freedom side of it. I didn't really have a chance to feel that way, appreciate the freedom, because it was work. Because after I put that record out, I started becoming a producer, and it was like the next project and the next project and the next project. And I was just trying to make, get to the end of this workload. And I think there were moments where I was like, oh gosh, I wish, I had that. But I had other keyboard players around me now that were just as good as Steve, and some were even better. And I had vocalists around me that were fresher, younger. So that side of it, I definitely felt blessed, I think, at the time, because it was up at the Ashes. I was the bass player that went all the way almost through every instrument. It's like guitar, bass, keyboards, and then vocals, and then production. So it was quite a journey, and there was a little bit of freedom looking back on it, because I can do more things now.
I mean, as I said, there's a massive legacy to Loose Ends, and in a way, I think that legacy is much more respected today. I know it was really always respected in America, but I think it's much more respected today. And as I said, you were also part of a sort of Black British Revolution, which was very, very important. And now you're at a point where you're going to go back on tour, aren't you?
Yeah.
So tell me about the tour and where you're going and what you've got planned.
Well, what we're doing now, we have our own little label, and we are releasing. I've been writing since COVID and during COVID, but I put out a couple of little things to see what the climate was, and I had to say, it was very different to putting songs out in the 80s. I think the song I put out made £300. And I was just like, wow, £300. Oh, you gotta laugh. But I was quite sad, really. But £300, I was like, wow, times really have changed. And so now, I think from then till now, last couple of years, just been trying to learn new techniques of being an independent, having to make records without the record company, because the record company has a lot of power. Record companies have the power to make things happen. If they get behind it, they can get you airplay, they can get you promotion, which you would probably not be able to afford yourself. And now that we are mainly independent, well, definitely my age group, most of the people I know are not signed anymore. And they have to make records independently, and they have to suffer the lack of airplay, because as a resource, airplay is expensive, and it does cost money. Promotion is expensive, but there are ways around it with short story content and short videos and stuff. You can do it. So now that technique is opening up, social media is starting to show signs of patterns where you can not spend too much money, but you can promote product. So now I think it's time for us to release this product that I've been working on. And so once we get 1 or 2 releases done in the next quarter, we'll probably miss this quarter already, because we're in March, but for the second quarter, we will put out music and go on tour. So that is the plan. But the music that I'm dealing with, a lot of people are saying, well, it's a bit Carl McIntosh, isn't it? It's more Carl McIntosh than it is Loose Ends, because they think of Loose Ends still as Jane and Steve, and Carl, back in the 80s. But I think even Jane and Steve have moved on musically. I think tastes change. And I think it'll be all right when we do it. It'd be nice. The songs that I've got at the moment, I'm working with Children of Zeus. I want to work with Omar. I'm going to put him on a song. And I want to put Terry Walker. I'd love to do something with Terry Walker. There's another girl called Ivy Chanel. Excuse me. These are people that I think it would be nice to have their vibe. And also, I've got these girls that I work with, the So-Called Vets. They're great girls. And we'll go on shows together and they do the girls' parts. And so I'm surrounded with talent at the moment, and it's going to be hard for me to not keep putting out music because I've got so much music. I even did an album that didn't get released in 1994, which some of those songs might be rehashed into this as well, because they were good songs. It was just they had samples and stuff, and the sample thing was at its peak financially when I was doing that, I think around 94. But yeah, Virgin refused to pay for samples, and I kind of got slung to the wayside. But you know, these things happen. But now we're in a great position. We've got loads of music, and it's time to release again and go on the road. So that's the thing is, we're going to put out some stuff in the next sort of 12 weeks. You're going to hear new loose ends, and this will hopefully get us pitched onto some good tour. We haven't got the tours arranged yet, but we know that once the music is finished, the tours will come. All right, so we get the music part done first, and then we'll go out and promote our songs by doing live shows on the road. So yeah, hopefully with a bit of luck, loose ends will be fully intact, back to normal. And you never know, you know, Steve, I'm not sure what his thing is with me. I think there was a lot of egos going on. He went from a leader to not being in his group, which is unfortunate, because I know that he wouldn't have wanted it to be that way. I didn't have a hand in it, but I think maybe he thinks I did. I'd love to give him a hug one day and explain that whole story. Well, hopefully he'll see this and he'll see that, you know, it was nothing to do with me. I just wanted to do work. And it was one of those things that happened. If you snooze, you lose type of thing. You know, you have to stay on the wire.
This feels like a very exciting time of your life. And when I was doing the research for this and listening to all the loose ends music, it felt like this is timeless music, very smooth. And I can really understand it hasn't lost any of its charm and todayness in a way, even though it's, you know, from a long time ago. So I really wish you much success. It's been brilliant talking to you. I don't want to just thank you, Carl. I want to thank you for the contribution you've made to the culture, because I think that's really important. Also, Steve and Jane, of course, but really the contribution, because we've been talking, to the culture. And at the end, I want to thank your dad, because I actually believe that if your dad and mum hadn't argued and he hadn't played you that music and sort of given you that drive, and also, and I think this is a really brilliant thing, I really think when you are a bit like Brian Wilson and you want to be a perfectionist and you are a perfectionist, it means you create amazing stuff. So from the bottom of my heart, Carl McIntosh, thank you.
Oh, can't follow that. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful chat, and it brings back great memories also. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews, and here is where you can connect.